it was Newton who finally worked out the tides. Because Bacon made, as we have said, no single discovery, modern scholars ignore the vigor, elegance, and magic persuasiveness of his philosophical writings. Now, modern scientists may not think much of Bacon, but Leibniz did. Quote, Leibniz said, "Compared with Francis Bacon, Descartes seems to creep along the ground." And Francis Bacon flies high or whatever, you know. Over the centuries, much ink has been spilt to show that Bacon did or did not influence John Locke. And then it doesn't say anything one way or the other about that. But if John Locke was basically the transmission belt from Aristotle to the Founding Fathers and the establishment of the United States, if John Locke's involved with the United States being established, then there would be some pretty important, it would be an important point to say that John Locke's philosophy was influenced greatly by Bacon. It would be interesting. Quote, Sir Isaac Newton acknowledged no debt to the Baconian empiricism, although 2 centuries later Charles Darwin, falling under scientific criticism, protested vigorously that he had worked on true Baconian principles, meaning getting a lot of evidence together before you mess around with it. Bacon's detractors declare that in natural philosophy his reputation was due to the importance of his position as Lord Chancellor, and that a world primed and ready for empirical thinking would have gone ahead as readily without him. In other words, he may have had a few things to say, but his position as Lord Chancellor is the only thing that gave him any real historical note. When the world's ready for science, it would have gone on Bacon or no. That's easy to say in retrospect, but who knows at the time how many people were influenced by Bacon saying the things he did. I mean, how can you say the world ready for science would have moved on without anyone like Bacon provoking it? What would have provoked them to, I mean, what would make them ready, if not words and appeals by men to other men? So I don't know, it's a little silly there. But Katherine Drinker Bowen continues. However that may be, it was Francis Bacon's voice that men heard crying in the wilderness. He was accepted by the English-speaking world as a familiar of the literate. The Elizabethan era is known as the age of Shakespeare and Bacon. In his own time, Bacon's friends helped to make the legend, those genial, brilliant gentlemen, young and old, with whom he corresponded, dined and wined, and talked away the summer afternoons, lounging in the canopied chair he had invented against the English wind. So we have there a picture of him sitting and talking with all of his different friends and stuff. Quote, there's a fascination to Bacon's friendships because they range so far afield, from the great minds of the age to doubtful but entertaining hangers-on. There were Bishop Lancelot Andrewes, Sir Henry Savile, both of whom helped translate the Bible into King James's English. Sir Thomas Bodley, Sir Robert Cotton, the great antiquaries and bookmen. George Herbert the poet, John Selden the legal scholar, Ben Jonson, Count Gondomar the wily, worldly ambassador from Spain, Fulk Greville, fastidious courtier and litterateur, and so on. It just goes on and on and on. That's a sample of the type of people Bacon knew. He really was a schmoozer, and perhaps when he laments the time he spent schmoozing, he does so with appropriate self-disdain. Now, if you would like to read some of Bacon's private speeches, papers, and public utterances and writings, a guy named James Spedding, S-P-E-D-D-I-N-G, published at intervals between 1857 and 74 the first 7 volumes, and he called these the Works, and the last 7 Bacon's Letters and Life. Altogether 30 years. So look up James Spedding on Francis Bacon for bunches of stuff from Bacon himself collected and put together and so on. Now a little tidbit about what Bacon says about being disinterested. You know, if you're disinterested, it means that you don't have any particular bias. You're not biased. That means that you're going to be objective and honest. They call this disinterested, having no interest in the situation. Bacon himself told a friend, apropos a contemporary, "I will not question whether you pass for a disinterested man or no. I freely confess myself I am not, and so I leave it." So I'm not going to say anything about you, but I am not disinterested. I have interests. A historian has said that the immensity of Bacon's genius has been a sore trial to his biographers. It is true. Here was a Renaissance man, as many-sided as Da Vinci. So he's very difficult to sum up and put into a biography because he did so much, even though it's hard to say exactly what he did. That's why his genius has been a sore trial to biographers. Now she talks for a moment about how the darkness of Bacon's life is quite a trial for his biographers as well. He is content to be, quote, "in the power of inferior men, content to take aid from such men, and even to sue for their favor." Quote, here's a letter that Bacon wrote, "Let me know your mind, and your lordship shall find I will go your way." And again, he writes later to the shrewd, blundering James I, quote, "I will be ready as a chessman, to be wherever your royal hand shall send me." Quote from now Katherine Drinker Bowen. She says, "We shrink from this evidence. It's painful to see a genius stoop for a mean prize. Perhaps the times were to blame. To live in the shadow of a queen's favor, to strive continually for a king's smile, is not pretty work. It drove Sir Walter Raleigh to fantastic plots, to despair, egregious lying, and the executioner's block. Outside the circle of royal patronage, there was no way for an ambitious man to rise in government. No way at all." So he could have resigned himself to nothingness and sat around starving his whole life, or try to gain courtship favor. And in trying to gain courtship favor, he himself says that he, in a lot of ways, wasted a good part of his life. So there we have it. Now, that's it for the prologue from Katherine Drinker Bowen. I might continue this later. I'm going to have to do some re-editing on it. So stay tuned for that, and let me know if you're interested in further stuff.